Welcome to ServiceSharp. This is a podcast all about ServiceNow. We'll be talking strategy, architecture, technology, and everything ServiceNow. This podcast is not affiliated with ServiceNow. The opinions expressed are our own. We're just people that are very passionate about the platform. Join us for every episode.
All right, this is Jason Gibson back with ServiceSharp. Of course, I've got Randy, Brent, and Justin with me. We're going to do something a little bit different this time. We're going to be doing something a little more technical, and we're going to be doing screen shares. This is going to be posted on YouTube. This is more educational than we typically do. You'll actually be able to learn something, except for us rambling on when we do. Justin, Brent, Randy, would you guys say hi real quick and we can get started?
Hi real quick.
Hello.
Hi. This is the best start we've ever had. My name is Justin Claspel. I've been working with ServiceNow for 5 years, I believe. Yeah. We're coming up on 5 now. Started with food. Is that right? Yeah, 2015.
Longer than that.
2015. That'd be 5 years.
Wow.
Only 2000? Wow, I guess so.
That's how math works, I think.
It is sometimes.
Anyway.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It feels like a lot longer for some reason. It feels like I've been doing this all my life.
Well, it's only been 5 years, but it's been, like 12 versions.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's about right. Yeah.
So, we were on E, and we're up to O now. So, I don't want to do the math there because that would make me look smart, and I'm not. Anyway, yeah.
So I don't want anybody to see me struggling with doing that math, so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. You don't want to see the pause there for way too.
At least I'm not on camera, so you can't see me counting with my fingers.
Yeah. So anyway, we're going to be covering actually API and API integrations, and Justin's kind of going to walk through that real quick and kind of show you an example of what that would be. Justin, why don't you take it from here and let me know later so I can harass you.
All right, sounds good. So all I'm going to go over today is a very simple REST API. It's not going to require any authentication, but I'll show you where you would enter that. On the screen now, you can see the wonderful ServiceSharp available on Anchor FM. And then we also have it on YouTube's without the S.
Which is probably the best place to watch it at.
Yes. Yeah, I don't believe the podcast would be the best place to do that. So I'm going to go over to our YouTube. I assume there's a link somewhere from the podcast to be able to get to this.
That's probably a good idea.
Yes. So anyway, hopefully that link is down over or up in the description, wherever it's located at in your particular platform. And I'm going to move on now. So
it gets better, folks.
Yes. Be prepared.
All right. So real quick, I'm just going to run through a couple things. First is the developer website. It's an amazing website. Developer.servicenow.com. Sign up for a free account. You can create your own instance here. It's not waking. It's currently awoken. Anyway, you get a free instance. It's very good, especially when like a new release comes out. You can upgrade it or just close it out and make a new one for whatever the newest release is. Or you can keep them open for a little while. I don't know how old you can actually keep. They force it eventually to move up. But anyway, you get these free ones. You can play around, follow along on what we're going to do. It's very quick.
And if you break it, you can always restart it.
Yeah, if you ever mess up, you've got all sorts of, you can play with plugins. You can add demo data, remove demo data, reset and wipe. There's the upgrade, although there's nothing to upgrade it to. So anyway. Yeah, great website. And they also have these little learning plans you can take. Every release, they update them so it'll look like you've never done anything. So if I went into one of these, they'd be empty. But depending on where you're starting at, these have some excellent courses that you can take, little modules that go through all sorts of stuff. These are getting more more advanced as you go down here. But this first one is definitely great, even if you're, not necessarily a everyday worker, but you're interested in it or just thinking about it, anything like that. These basics one really goes over some of the core concepts. So anyway, highly recommend you do it. That's on the learning part of the developer site, and then your instance itself is also available there if you want one. So moving along, here's my developer instance that I started for this. We'll be working out of it, very, very generic. The only thing I've done is have created the REST message to make sure it works, but we're going to go through all that again and do it anyway. And this is the example API I'm using. I have no idea who made this, but it's a free one you can make, or that you can consume rather, sorry. So thanks to this person, props to them. But anyway, it's a wonderful API. It just has very basic get. I'm not going to show how to do post, put, or delete. But again, if you wanted to play with it, they've given you the endpoints here, and details gives a little bit more information about it, and also shows you the sample results. So again, great little website. That's what we're going to use for this. We're going to do this first one here that just grabs a big list of all employee data, which is actually, I don't remember, I think it's like 19 records or something like that. This is all live, so people can mess with it. There may be more or less when you do it, but moving on to do a basic REST integration. So things that REST are commonly used for are, weather APIs. Like on here, they have the finance API if you want to, check stocks or whatever else you might be needing to show. I know weather is common. Mapping data is also a common thing you would use a REST call for. I've used it for zip codes. Somebody put in a zip code and you return back the city and state that zip code is in. You can also do the reverse, address lookups, all sorts of things. If anyone else on the call knows any other REST APIs they've consumed, throwing you all on the spot here. Okay, moving on.
I couldn't think of any off the top of my head.
Yeah, I can't really think of any, but weather and
we did the Google Maps API was one that we've consumed. And I use for testing stuff. I use a different. I use Postman, but.
And they've also got, like, if you have a service, you can actually do any sort of SMS outbound thing. That, like they're doing push messages here with the ServiceNow app.
I did.
Sure you
we've
could do
done
Slack.
ServiceNow to ServiceNow integration is pretty simple with the REST messages and
you actually can do that as well. And they have another
Slack
way of doing those, but
and Slack is one of those that you can.
So anyway, real quick, well, as you see here, I've made this one already, but we'll make a new one. So let me start over again. When you're on the main thing, just type REST up here in the navigator, and you will see outbound and REST message is what you want to click on. Blah. And then new would be to create a new one. And for this, we're just going to do example REST employees. And the endpoint is not admin. That is just, for some reason, following my wonderful auto-populated stuff there. But the endpoint for here is what they're calling the full route. So you would take this, copy it, and then paste it in there. If you wanted to make this multi-purpose, because all of these APIs go off API/v1, that might be a better way to do it would be to do this, and then you can have multiple calls that do each of those. But
and that particular one has to be V1, which is version. The V1 indicates the version. V1, V2. If you leave it blank, though, you'll get whatever the most current version is. So I think that's something that we like to do occasionally.
Yeah, when you're talking to ServiceNow, you definitely, that's an optional. Some APIs that may not be optional. I have not tried this particular one to see if you can leave out the versions, but ServiceNow definitely does it that way. And they do that so that if you do use, let's say, version 1, if we ever change it, you still have version 1, and so your integration with us does not break, type of thing. So it's pretty common, like Jason said, for you to be able to leave that out. But On this one, we're going to leave it this way. And we're having no authentication. This, again, would be if you have basic or OAuth. You can, if you choose basic, which is basically like username, password, and you just pass it. And then you can create your own or use the built-in one. This is the easiest way, I think, to make the authentications is to choose it and then click the search there and then click new from this page instead of trying to find it over here in the navigator. There's several different types of authentication things you can, credentials you can make, and sometimes it doesn't create the right type. But if you do it through here by choosing basic, it already has all that assigned. So anyway, if you're doing one that does require authentication of some sort, you would make it here. Mutual authentication. I've never used that, but authenticate.
So it can only be mutual authentication can only be used through the mid server as well. So it can work. It's basically like sending it back. You authenticate, then it authenticates, and so.
Anyway, that'd be something to play with if you need it. But I've only ever had to use basic, and OAuth I had to use for a Microsoft Intunes integration once. But moving on, here's where you would put your headers. This particular API does not actually require any headers to be passed, but some will require you to pass, like format, and then JSON is how they'd want it labeled. And so this is where you would put your header. Again, this would be on whatever API documentation you have. So if it's like a Google API, they will tell you what request headers you need, and this is where you would fill those out. We don't need any for this, so I'm just going to leave that blank. And these are just strings. They're not, there's no, if you put a number, it's still just a string, just throwing that out there. And then I like to save it instead of submit, because that way I stay on my page. So right click up there and save. And as you can see, we now have methods. You have a default get, which is automatically going to pull whatever you had as the endpoint. So we'll click on that. And as you can see, it's already got that filled in. Again, you're allowed to inherit. If, for example, on this one, there was there's post and put and delete. Those are possibly going to use different accounts. So you may have to, again, specify a different authentication type here, or you can just inherit. Here again is your option to add the request headers and query parameters. Query parameters are like up here in the address bar, anything after this little question mark. URI is one of them, and then sysrest message would be this right here, would be the value. So just to give you an idea what a query parameter is, they're just a little, well, they're query parameters. I don't really know how else to word that. But anyway, anything after the question mark and before an equal sign. And then after this, it's going to be an ampersand, wherever the next one would be in there that I can't find, so who cares? And then, and the neat thing about these, so here, I'll show you up here, you can actually do variables in your endpoints or your headers and query parameters. And to do those, you just do that, which would be a $ curly bracket, and then whatever you want the variable to be named, and then in curly bracket. And so I'll show you how to use that here in a second. But again, you can use them in here as well. So if we do filter, and we'll do $ curly filter, and then we're going to go ahead and save this again. And you can auto-generate variables up here, or you can choose this one here, or you can manually create them. So I'll create the first one manually real quick. We're going to create filter. So you hit new. We don't want to update our password. The name will be filter. The test value is going to be JSON. We do not want any escaping unless you're doing, if you're sending XML, you may have to escape, but don't worry about that usually. And so as you can see, it automatically adds it down here. What that's going to do is just replace this here with the word JSON, and I'll show you that again. Since we had another variable up here, we can now still hit generate, and it should generate, yeah. And now we have type. And so for type, if we look back on our API, I hope I'm not moving around too much here. No. After V1 was just employees. So we'll go back here, and for a test value of type, You just double click on the, if you can type it right. And we have employees. These are just the test values that you're putting in here. They're not necessarily defaults. You'll see how to add to those. But again, we have the 2 types. And so this is going to make that be v1/employees. So at this point, you can actually just test, which is what we'll do here in just a moment. Actually, let's go through with the test real quick. And before we start messing with the background script and how you actually would consume this in code, we'll take a break for that after I show you the test. But again, now that the variables are down here and filled in, or if you don't have any, because you're not required to have variables. So if you had no variables on here at all, you can just hit test, and it will bring back the, trying to update the password. Again, status 200. 200 means a success generally. Technically, the person who makes the API can return whatever they feel like it. So again, reference the API documentation. But most commonly, 200 means it's a success, and like a 401 and a 403, I believe, are generally account issues, whether it be permission or password. 500 and 400 are usually either you have a malform syntax on sending it, or the server side, something messed up. 500 is generally something on the server side, but it can still be you messing up the query as well. So just some things to keep in mind. 200 good. Any of the 400s are generally your fault, or the account may not have the permissions as well. That's usually a 403. And then 500 is also can be anyone's fault, but definitely not good. And those are just, again, the common numbers, but they can number it however they want technically if they don't want to follow defaults. So again, here's what the endpoint ended up being. As you saw, we had it typed where it had the type, $ curly type, and instead it put in the test value. There is no parameter actually, because you don't pass them. It did not have to pass them. Here's the response you get back, which is all of the employee data in one big JSON string. This can be returned back in it could be XML, it could, whatever the API is going to respond. It does not have to be JSON.
But JSON is really, in my opinion, easier to work with.
It is very simple to work with, and I'll show you just how simple here in just a moment. So again, that was a test. You can go back to your test run, and I'm going to delete the header here because we don't actually want the header. Actually, you know what? Let's make one. I'll put the filter down here, and then I can show you what it would look like if you have a query parameter in your. Oops, let me save it real quick. And I'll show you what a query parameter will look like on a test run. I'm going to auto-generate again, which will delete everything there. And, I need to make that $ filter. There, you make it an actual variable. Okay. Save again. Auto-generate. Hit OK. We now have the filter, and this in the test value is where we put JSON. And now we hit test. And right here, you can see that this is what it would add as a query parameter, filter, and then it replaced with JSON, which was my variable replacement. So I'll show you how you can do all that by code later, because a lot of this, especially if you're like trying to consume this one here where you push the ID of the person, you'll probably want to do that from a script somewhere. So I'll show you how to replace the query parameters via code here after we take a quick moment for Jason to talk to you about something.
All right. So yeah, we need to take a quick break and listen to our sponsor. And when we come back, we're going to be moving on with this and continuing to talk about how we use this. So give us a few minutes and we'll be right back. All right, we're back, and Justin, he's going over in an integration and how to get an integration done, kind of a step-by-step. So, Justin, if you don't mind, let's go ahead and take it from here.
Sure. So, real quick, I'm going to run another test I want to show you how simple JSON data is to work with here. Helps if I show you my screen, doesn't it? All right. So if I just paste in, there's the whole JSON response. You just right-click format. This is using Visual Code, but I'm sure all sorts of probably should have hit all that. Anyway, all sorts of this tools can do this. I imagine Sublime and probably Notepad++ and whatever else there is out there. But yeah, now you see the status, the data, how each individual record inside that data. Very simple to read and much lighter than XML is. So again, just very easy to work with. And assuming you have a tool like Visual Studio Code, which is free, that can do a format document and filter it out like this, very, very easy to read. While a big old clump of XML, you can format XML as well, but it would still have a lot more special characters that might make it harder for some people to be able to filter through and read.
Yeah. Well, not only is the name is pretty awesome too, but it is very easy to work with.
Well, it's one of those things where, I call it JSON. Some people call it JSON. I don't think it's not even tied to like how long you've been doing it, because there's plenty of people who have been coding longer than me that don't use the same way of pronouncing it. We all know what we're talking about, unless there happens to be a JSON in the room like there is on this call. Then I guess it could be confusing. But anyway, so that's the very simple part of just querying, getting a result back from a REST API. Again, this is out on the web. This is just a website out there. So it's not like I'm querying the ServiceNow instance. This really did go out to a website, consume their API. Very simple. Just a handful of clicks, especially if you're consuming a public API that has no sort of authentication, which, I mean, even authentication would have taken another 3 fields to fill out on that authentication profile.
Yeah.
So it's not
another 5 seconds.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Oh, and I guess I forgot to point this out earlier. If you are not doing an external call and you need to do in your own network, you would use your mid server. And here, I don't think the instance has the test instance doesn't have a mid server, but you probably do if you have an install going. And if not, they're very easy to set up. Obviously, I'm not going to cover that in this course, but anyway, you could choose a mid server and that would scan your local network. However you have your mid server set up, again, make sure that it has access to whatever server or site you're trying to consume, because some networks are far more complicated than others. So, but again, that's how you would do it. Would be here. You just choose it on the HTTP request. I don't believe you can actually do it at the top level. Yeah, you can't do it at the top. You have to do it at each method. I don't entirely know the reason for that. Maybe it's just to prevent accidentally using a mid server. I really like to change the default get to just get or something more specific as well. And that you can do that as well. We could rename it get. And I'll show you how this. Hold on. When you preview, so this is how you would call it, the name, and that's like Jason has a good point. This name is how you're going to refer to this method when you're trying to consume it in code. So default get might be probably not confusing, but it might be confusing to someone who's looking over the code and not familiar with it. So if you just change it to get, or you could even do get employees or whatever you want to call it, and then save it. And so now whenever I click down here to preview script usage, this will actually give you a copy and pastable example of how to use this in a script include. I've not tried it client side, so I can't answer that question if it works on client side. I do know it works in a server include or script include or a business rule, though. I do know it works on those. And again, if you have any variables created, it will already give you this here. If you do not have variables, obviously there will be none there. But these are handy because, like I was telling you earlier, if we needed to change on one of the other calls, there would be another one that is, employee, one or whatever. And that one would be in your business rule or script include, you would pass, current user number. And then that would query the API that way. So that's how you would use it and I'll show you how to do that in a business rule here in a second, or not a business background script. So anyway, you can copy and paste this code, and I'm going to do that.
I mean, I've used it in script includes, and I've used this in business rules and scheduled jobs, but I don't think I've ever used it in a client side either.
It is actually suggested not to use on the client side because of the way it works and all. It is suggested to use on the server side since it's synchronized.
I mean, you can still call a server side from client side if you want to pass information into the client side.
That is
just use a glide Ajax.
way.
Call your script include.
Yep.
I mean, that's the way I would do it. Just to another level of removing that from the user anyway. Because if it is available to do on client side, they could technically manipulate the JavaScript of that code if they were smart enough, I guess, to try to do that. I'm not so sure how well it would work in a client side script, but
ServiceNow recommends not doing it client side. So.
Yeah,
these sort of things you're going to do it behind the scenes anyway, because again, we're going to pass, like you're going to hit submit, and you're going to want, or even on populate, you're going to want the code that way. So you would not. I don't think you'd want to do too many client things.
It would also drag it down pretty heavy. You
could with like I was saying, just do a glide Ajax, which would. It works exactly like a glide. Like a glide record call. You know, it's same way of working with it. And you can call script include that way. But anyway, moving along here. So type in background over here on scripts background. Click it. I really got to get that thing to quit prompting. And then the code from earlier, if you just paste it in here, you're actually going to get nothing if you hit the run because you're not telling it to print. So one of the things I would recommend adding would be, and I'm going to copy and paste quite a bit of this, and I'll go through the lines as I'm doing it. First, I would get rid of all this, anything commented out, because you're not. Here, let's do this in an editor. This will make more sense because color coding helps everything. So here's that code minus this is the new bit we'll be adding. But if we get rid of the commented out code, it's not actually doing anything, and it just makes it harder to read. So let's, although, again, it tells you if you want to override your authentication, you could do so here. Same thing with a mid server, you could specify it here. And then if you want to do any ECCQ stuff, which is events mostly, like it's a way of working with your mid server as well. I don't never mess with those, but apparently there's a way you can do that in there as well, and it describes it. So what I would do, here's the base code that came with, whenever I hit that, everything minus the commented out code. What I'm going to add here is I'm going to parse using the JSON, whatever, that's built in JavaScript. So we will parse the response body, which is here. We will then turn that into this variable, which is actually an object now, and .data. And as you saw a minute ago, here's data. So this is all an object now. So first level is that, and these are the next two. I can do status or data as we're choosing here. Data is going into this variable, which is still going to be an array of objects. And then you have status, which status will be success. At least hopefully that's what we want it to say when it returns back. And we're not actually going to grab any of these. I don't think I do. No, I'm just grabbing the length of it. Of just the employee data, which again is the .data, so that'll count all of these that are in the data property there. So, and then we're just going to pass them out into gs.print, which is how you get things to show on a background script if you actually want to view them. And,
well, yeah. So basically, without doing a gs.print, it's not going to have anything. You're not going to know what happened.
Yeah, it's just going to be. It's just going to return like I had here a moment ago where it's just empty. Yeah. You don't know if it's a success or a fail. If it's a failure, a really bad failure, you could look.
There'll be an error in the script is what it would show if there was a big problem.
Yeah, if you have a typo, actually, it would tell you about a typo. So let's leave off something that would actually, there we go. Now it's telling you, hey, missing the in parentheses. It doesn't point you necessarily there. It doesn't say line 18, which it's not line 18 because it's line 18, technically, the first time it recognizes the error is after all of that. But anyway, at least you know.
And I like to do the background script to try and start to kind of build and test things before I put them in the business rules.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I do everything out of a background script first. I even do business rules out of background scripts if they're working with the current variable or current object and whatever, because you can mimic it. And I guess I can show that another time. how I mimic the current record. That way I can still do like current.number, current.name. I can still test all that stuff without having to have a current, like doing it in the business rule. I can all do it in a background script.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yep.
But anyway, so if I run this, as you can see, the static, let me see if I can squeeze the code here at the bottom. Here's the results, which is this one here. And that's going to be awesome. Don't click, Justin. The /r/n is why it does a new line. That's return in the new line. So status 200 is status, and then we pass the variable 200, blah, blah, blah. There's the body, which is right here. And then, of course, the response body. And then we print it out a little bit nicer way to read it here, where it's just the status, and then we put the code number itself. Mm-hmm. And this one here, HTTP status, is actually a built-in. This one is going to be defined by default. When you do that schedule or preview script usage, it's automatically going to have that on there. Right. But a lot of people, the actual number may not be as helpful as string, which again should be in the API. Not every API will be called status, though. They may have a different way of doing it. But most of them will return you back what the code actually means in terms of a string. So that's what this one is doing. That's why it says success. Again, in length, there was 24 records. 24 records, which if you really want to, you can count. Actually, we don't have to count because they're numbered. So 24. Apparently, they don't start with 0. No, they don't. Bad coding right there. But anyway, and that's it. That's very simple. If you wanted to consume this, again, you would make a business rule is how I would probably do it, or a scheduled script include, as Jason mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. A scheduled job. That's a very common way of doing it. I've done it to Workday. I don't remember if that was SOAP or REST though. But anyway, any sort of like this here, you might even query every night, bring it in, and then filter through the results and make sure Tiger Nixon's employee salary, maybe he gets paid well, or she.
Yeah.
Or maybe their profile image, whatever. You can just run through each one and check it against what maybe your user table, or if you have a custom table or CMDB table, whatever your data you're pulling in, you could then run through it. Now that you have the object here, again, .data is simply because of that's the way this API works. Check your API documentation that you're consuming. But for this object, employee data, we could filter through the employee data where we do like _var I equals 0. I is less than employee count, I ++. And then you could filter through and go through every record here. We don't, every record there and actually work with the data inside of it, inside your scheduled job, business rules, script include, or if you're doing Glide Ajax. Again, you're going to do all the heavy lifting in that script include, though. I as the other guys mentioned, I do not recommend doing any client-side stuff. If you're going to just pull it that way, leave all your actual code, like the logic, the business logic should be in a script include, in my opinion. Because then if I want to, I can consume it in a business rule later, or a script include, a scheduled job later. Mm-hmm. You can reuse it much easier whenever you make them in script include. So if you're doing a ton of business logic with something like this, I would make it in a script include. So
definitely.
Gonna go real quick here and double check.
I will say that we did SolarWinds using the scheduled job, running the script in the scheduled job to grab the data and to bring it in and put it into. So what you do is you use this, and this is where you get all the data. Then you bring it in, and you actually will put it into an import table that you've created for it. Then from the import table, then you can run your transform map.
Yeah, I used it once to look up the addresses on the locations and put the longitude and latitude in there so that the maps would be populated automatically. But it would just do that off your locations, and it was a scheduled job that ran every so often. I think we did it once a week because it was a lot of data to update. But
yeah, we did a business rule that grabbed they put in an address for the beginning and an end date of where they're going. So they clocked in, clocked out basically from their location. and it put their location down, and it went out and grabbed the Google Maps API, and actually filled out the distance. It's actually the Google Distance API, but
Oh yeah, I forgot we did that one too.
remember that? Yeah, it was
No,
good.
I was thinking the locations when we made the longitude and latitude show up so you could see them on the map.
Yeah.
So one other thing I forgot to point out in the code here, this line we are calling the REST message v2. The first one is going to be the name of the endpoint, which in this case is example REST employees, or the message is what they're going to call it. And then this is the method. So we called it get_employees. Again, to Jason's point earlier, it just said default get. So you kind of want it to be somewhat specific so that you can glance at it. And same thing, it's important to name your message as well to make sense. So this may actually be fairly bad. You may want to call it, like Active Directory employees or something. You know what I mean? Like that may be what you would want to name your or even just Active Directory, and then the name of the method would be get employees or something along those lines. So, be descriptive on your messages and your methods so that in the code, when you glance at it, it's easy to see. And again, if you ever want to know, if somebody gives you the code and you're trying to figure out, well, how do I see this in the actual platform? You just want to look at this first bit here, which is example REST. Again, type REST up here in the filter. Go to outbound REST message, and it's going to be the name that shows up here. So in this particular case, it was the second one, I think. Yeah, example REST employees. And now you're in there and you know what it is. So that's really all I wanted to cover. This again is just a very, very quick, basic run through.
That brings up a point, though. You want to make sure that you don't duplicate those REST message names, because you could. I mean, it's going to run into issues when you call them in the script.
Yeah,
Right.
or like I had on, like obviously you can't do the exact same, but to his point, you could name it very, very similar, right? Like these aren't as similar as I thought they were. But let's say this one is, or even whatever. You get the idea. If you name them too close together, you'll have a harder time finding it. You can try to find it by the endpoint, but the endpoint does not have to like see this one here doesn't have the employees part on it. You do have to have one, but I think I could put probably anything in there, and as long as it's a valid URL, it doesn't actually have to match any of your method, which the method, as you can see down here, is still the API. So yeah, that first page where you're on the message itself, the endpoint, I think it's just used for what you're going to default when you create. If I create a new method now, well, nope, I actually thought it was going to default it. I have no idea what the point of having that on the messages, because this doesn't seem to ever do anything.
It's just so you can see
just
it
mandatory.
in the first list.
Yeah, it's
No,
mandatory.
but it also
Well,
writes down to the endpoint.
Well, actually, I bet since I'm not required to have, we're still doing get. I'm not required to have anything here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait, that's going to fail because. So here's a good example of a failure that looks like a success, because here's 200, but as you can see down here, this is regular HTML, and that is not somewhere on here. It's probably going to say, and I'm not going to find it. We're almost there. Keep searching. It'll say, yeah, it just loaded their main page.
Yeah,
because it actually is. It's not a valid endpoint.
So for the people listening and not watching, what did you do to cause it to do this fail? It looks like a success.
All right, yeah, let's go. So I left on the new method that I made. I left the endpoint empty, which seems to use whatever you have on the message.
right.
So you can leave the endpoint empty on your methods that you create under the message. So that's the hierarchy. Message is the top, and then you create methods to that. And apparently you can leave them empty, and they'll use the message's default, or you can specify your own, of course, on each method. So that was kind of a nice little test there. But anyway, what I was trying to get at, the whole point there is when you go to REST message itself, endpoint may not be a useful thing. It may not be exactly what you're looking for. So try to use the name, which is the first parameter of the SN REST message v2, I think is what it's called. So,
And if you're really good, you could even put a real description in there of what the message is being used for.
yes, you could type something useful here.
Because, everyone uses that description field.
Yeah, I'm showing you the common way.
It's like everyone comments their code very well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, even the built-in ServiceNow ones don't have a description. That's great right there.
I was being sarcastic because, that's
Do
usually
any of
how it
them?
is.
No.
Do as
None
we
of-
say,
not
not
a-
as we do, huh?
Yeah, not a single one has. I mean, it's not a required field, so obviously it's not important.
Hey, even the ones I've gotten from companies don't have the description. So, yeah.
But at this level, see, that's kind of, they should add a description to the method more so than the message, because
Well,
although
I think-
technically what you're supposed to do is what you're supposed to do is for the methods are supposed to be get, post, push, delete. Like you're not supposed to necessarily go to a totally different endpoint for each one. Because an HTTP method is get or post or put, and then delete. I don't, there's probably more than that, but those are the common REST ones. So that's kind of the idea they did, but you can consume, if you want to do it by like the integration itself, rather than say each message is its own actual ServiceNow REST message, you can combine them all under one and just be very clever with your method naming for the HTTP. And that probably just sounded more confusing than it needed to be. But anyway, they let you do however you want. You're not required to only have it be called post and have one of them. You could have 100. Actually, I have no idea what the limit is, so don't quote me on 100. But you can have a lot. I've had, I think I've had 8 or 9. I don't know if I've ever even gone over 10 on one. But I've had several that are, you just change the endpoint on the method because I'm trying to use that message kind of as the container for, like in the example I have on the screen right now, Firebase Cloud Messaging. I would have however many different API calls or different APIs they offer would all be under that. So anyway, again, you're allowed to do it however you guys feel.
So you could create a REST message for each one of those that you'd want, but you could put them all underneath the same method or under the same message. They would just be different.
Correct. So like on the API example that I have on the screen, the website we used, which all five of these could be under one message, or since each one is technically its own endpoint, because it's not employees push, pull, get, post, whatever. It's each one is its own. So each one of these could be its own message, which technically they are their own message. If you want to be completely technical about what a REST message is, this would be a get REST message, which the method is still technically get. It even says method right there. Look at that. Back me up. Thank you, website. So yeah, you could just have, it could be you could have 5 separate entries on your outbound REST messages, or you could have one that is the, whatever the name of the application is, in this case, dummy REST API example, and then have 5 methods under that as a, kind of a container type thing for all that are related to that. I know we're kind of beating this one.
Right, but it could work either way, however you wanted to manage it.
And again, just to be clear, this is like a very quick run through that probably isn't quick in terms of time, but it is quick in terms of what I'm trying to show. I'm not trying to go through every line or every possible option that you can have. We could definitely go much more in depth if somebody needed that.
Well, and if you need some additional help or you want to reach out to us and ask for some more specifics on one thing or another, we can help you on that. I will say the thing that we haven't really talked about is how you get it from here into the table, if you would, the import table. And that's, Justin, could you kind of maybe do a quick explanation of how you get it from from the business rule or scheduled job into an import table if you're wanting to do it that way?
I probably won't go into a huge amount of detail. So one way to do that is to extend the import set row and then to create a transform map on that. And I'm just describing this. I'm not actually showing anything. That's one way to do it. But again, those are very specific to each integration you're doing. You may not want to do that. You may just want to have all the code that's happening in, like I said earlier, a script include to where that's where all the logic is, and you're not using a transform map necessarily because maybe you want a little bit more control. I mean, a transform map is handy, but there are some things that is not necessarily going to be the best case for. So we could go into those again, maybe on another podcast or something.
Well, and I was more specifically thinking, how do you get it from the script? Like, are you using a glide record?
You could, if that's the way. Like, you could do the transform map, like we mentioned, on an import set row, which would then, when you insert into that table, what you would do, like in that scenario, you're probably going to do that most often in a scheduled job. If you're going to be using an import set table, you would probably be doing that in a scheduled job. And when it runs, the scheduled job itself would call, this bit here, call the rest message. And then once you got to here, this is where you would do, your insert with a glide record into whatever that custom table you made, that extended import set row. And that's where you would insert into it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, those get really complicated really quick. So that's more of a, either we spend time and I actually be able to give you an example, because coming up with one off the top of my head is not going to probably be all that useful to try to explain to somebody. Again, especially at the pace I'm trying to go for these on how quick I'm covering stuff. But if we get enough people who want that sort of thing, we can definitely show you how to consume this instead of, this was just how do you get the integration connected. And at this point, you can query that system. You're not doing anything with the data, as Jason pointed out. The data it's just, we have the option to call this and get a response and manipulate it in various, whether it be the script include or the scheduled job or whatever we want to do. There are many options, and it's not a one-stop shop either for integration. Sometimes you're going to want to do like a one-off, like a business rule call, like maybe an async business rule where you have a new user record gets added to the sys user table. You create a business rule that's then going to query your employee system, which would, in the example here, it's going to be the one that you're allowed to pass an ID to, and then we get that single employee's data back, and then you update whatever your sys user table is with said data. That's a decent example of a way to use this in a business rule, and it is that's a good way to do that. Like I've worked with UltiPro before. They don't have a REST API, so I guess I should take that back. But I mean, that is a system that you could, a system similar to that, where they're like a web-based HR portal where your HR folks do the onboarding if you're not using ServiceNow, which there are options for that as well. Call Sharpstone. I'm sure we're able to help if you'd like that. But anyway, yeah, you can consume the data that way on a one-to-one type of thing.
But a lot of it has to do, and the reason why you look online and you don't see a lot of stuff about integrations is because everything is different. When you're talking about integrations, if you understand how things work similar to this, now you know how things get connected. But each system that you're going to connect to is a little different. So there isn't any cookie cutter answer.
Right.
But,
I mean, we have one that is triggered by workflow, and it goes out to the VM environment, like vCenter. Or actually, it's a tool that they use that connects to our vCenter, and it checks the status of virtual servers, and then comes back and updates a catalog item with that, and stuff like that. So it can be used in so many different ways, and use that data in so many different ways.
And a lot of these are not hard, especially if it's a REST. REST calls are probably one of the, again, assuming there's decent support by the endpoint API or documentation, which is the type of support. anyway, as long as it's got decent documentation, it should not be hard to at least get it set up. Now, manipulating the data to be what you want it to be, that can be more time consuming because as we all know, no two people type even my name the same way. So trying to correct for user ingenuity is what
I don't type my own name the same way every time. But whenever you're doing REST calls into ServiceNow, have you used the REST Explorer?
Only time I've used, so that's more of an outbound.
Oh, that's what I meant. But you can also use it to get the if you're like in the if someone else is trying to do REST calls or posts back into your system, they can use this to get what ServiceNow's would be.
Yeah,
is what I was trying to.
Yeah, it's a great.
To. So
and I don't. If you can see the screen, I went through that really quick. But this is a great way to it'll build out. You can build it out however you want here. What am I doing? I'm retrieving records from incident. I've limited it to 1. Let's do 10. And then you get the response back. Here's the actual data. And you could, if you're working with somebody here, so this tells you everything you would need to know. Remember I said headers earlier? Here's the headers. They want an accept header, they want a content type, and the X user token.
Right.
So you would need to pass those. And then if you wanted to see this, you get ServiceNow script. If you're in ServiceNow wanting to talk to like another instance on a one-off, you can click that and it'll show you the script on how to do that. Or if here's JavaScript, this would be if you're not in ServiceNow, but let's say your mobile app or whatever is trying to get data from your ServiceNow instance. You could do that with, here's a JavaScript example, or like I said, PowerShell. It gives you the code just right there that you can copy paste and try it out.
That's a really slick feature.
Yes.
Well, exceptionally helpful, especially because these are very common for integration. Like I've done a lot of PowerShell integrations. It's kind of like the perfect middleman whenever you have two systems that could talk, but either there's a knowledge gap or a support. I mentioned earlier about the support problem. Like we have an SAP one that I was working on recently that there was no SME or no expert that we could get a hold of to help us with, and I didn't have access. No one on my team had access into the actual SAP instance. So we ended up using PowerShell to do a bunch of XML calls because they simply have, we had no support to be able to figure out how to actually get, like what username, how to do it.
Work with what you got.
Yeah, sometimes you have to do what you have to do to get the stuff in.
And PowerShell has a lot of nice modules. So you may not even, depending on what, like Active Directory, you don't even have to do anything fancy. Not granted, Active Directory is pretty well supported by ServiceNow. But if you had to, got
Perl and Python for the Linux boxes out there. That people
curl as well. Curl's a very common one for Linux.
Well, I mean, you got to remember that when you're talking about a Git, the only thing really required is the accept header. But if you're looking at a post or a put or a patch or a delete, you're going to have to do both accept and content type is what ServiceNow requires. And so if you don't know all that stuff, you click on one of these scripts and it tells you everything. I mean, that's the beauty of this is that you don't have to know, what I just told you. I know, but I didn't need to know that because I could just click on that script and get it. So that does help you along the way. So if you're not a hardcore, developer, or you're not somebody who is really experienced in doing API calls or doing integrations, the reality is this does help you if you're from an external system, but an internal system or from internally or to pull from an external source is a little more difficult.
Yes, this is mainly if you're trying to do pulls or pushes from somewhere into here. It'll help with that side because you've already set up the ServiceNow side. That way you can go back and forth.
Well, and there's a jillion ways to do this. I mean, you've got to bring in data. I've been working with SCCM recently, and they have that built-in integration, but there were fields and values and things that we needed that weren't included in it. Well, it's just it's a data source with it is a JDBC connection with a SQL statement, and if you can do those things, it's very easy to set up an integration or expand an integration that ServiceNow already has to encapsulate more stuff.
That's great. There's all sorts of internal, external. I think we haven't even covered SOAP. It's another common one that works similarly, kind of, to the way REST does.
Yeah.
I really sold that one, didn't I? Similarly,
you did.
kind of.
What do you think is more stable, though? I mean, honestly,
if I'm working with secure data, I want SOAP. If I'm working with just retrieving, if I'm working with something that I don't have to have, not security, I wouldn't. I mean, they're both. Well, they're not both as secure. To me, SOAP is just a better option if you want to make sure everything is exactly the way it needs to be. SOAP is not a very forgiving, I'm going to say language, but that's not the right terminology there.
Way of doing it.
Yeah, I can't think of the way. Anyway.
SOAP is more precise.
Yeah, it's very precise. And REST, you have a lot more leeway. It's all just strings. There's no real format requirement. Like you can probably put them in whatever order you want. Like on the query parameters, like you can get very unclean. It's so dirty.
But if you're not worried about, I mean, I see this REST messages and I see that it's as secure as anything else that's in ServiceNow.
Yeah,
So
I mean, again, you're doing everything over HTTPS anyway. So unless somebody's in your network already on that computer, and then at that point, good luck, I guess. I mean, they've already won if they've gotten there already. So
yeah.
SOAP, again, it's more of a defined protocol. Hey, there we go. Than what I'm going to say. But again, neither one is like better than the other for all situations. Some things don't offer SOAP. Some things don't offer REST. Like I said earlier, the UltiPro, they don't offer. No, not a knock on them, but totally a knock on them. They don't offer REST. And if you're a web-based tool that does not offer a REST service to consume, get out of being in business. Is my
right? Yeah. Not that we're knocking them.
Yeah, no knock on. If I have to use Informatica to talk to your stats anyway.
With all due respect.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that we're
Yeah.
But yeah. So again, SOAP and REST, not to knock on it. It's all going to depend on what you have available for whatever tool you're trying to consume. So if you don't go to somebody and say, I have to have REST because I heard this guy say it had to be more precise and I get better data, you may not even have that option. So don't get stuck on anything.
Right. It kind of depends on what you can use too. Yeah. Back to you do what you have to.
Yeah, and again, they may not have someone. They may offer SOAP, but they may not have, an expert, subject expert that you can talk to actually get the right data to connect to it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Looking at you, SAP. No. Okay.
We've all had our problem. We've all had our problems because you need certain bits of data sometimes from the system you're connecting to, and it's hard sometimes because you don't necessarily have the people that are willing to help you. But there are ways around it, and I'm not saying always go around it, but sometimes you have to do it. So
yeah,
every integration is different. We've had our good integrations that we thought were going to be hard, and we've had our hard integrations that we thought would be easy. So
there's even those out of box integrations that are supposed to be just turn it on and go that end up being okay. No, we have to change a lot of stuff.
Or how about so you get it turned on and you start configuring and nothing happens at all,
or everything happens.
Yeah,
those are the
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
How do I get rid of 3 million records?
Yeah. Well, this is why I use my sandbox when I'm doing my first connections.
Well, and another good point that Brenda's brought up: if you're doing the background script testing, you can have it record. Let me go back there, and as long as you're on a recent version, you can record for rollback.
Yep.
So when you run this, if it updates those 3 million records, you can then go to, I think it's like script execution history. There we go. Script execution history. Find the one like I ran this one here. Open says of me. What's going on here? There we go. and you can see this is the one it did. It'll have another tab here that says like affected records or something along those lines.
Yep.
And then you can see, it really did do
It did what
So
I
it just,
or whatever, and then you can roll back. This doesn't have the option to roll back because I didn't actually update any records.
Yeah,
well,
just
and
did a print.
we did an integration with a SQL database that had information on compliance on computers, and we wrote that back in, and we decided to send an email to people who are not compliant. Now, when you load it initially, it put everything as non-compliant and switched everything to compliant. And so we sent 10,000 emails. So when you're running things to production, you might turn off email just to be on the safe side.
Yes.
And I mean, of course, you should always test in production.
Right. I mean, testing.
Always. It's mark of an expert right there. Mark of an expert.
A normal person would have tested that in like dev or test and gone, "Oh crap, my inbox," because I'm the admin.
Well, now that's the thing is it was tested in dev and it was tested in test, but it didn't have the when the flag was created. It just was kind of a fluke thing, but. You should be able to prepare for those kind of things. When you're updating a bunch of data, you really got to think about how is it going to affect differently in production than it will in the other environments.
And
Well,
to
that's
follow
just
that,
in general.
to follow that up, you don't just disable it. And I'm showing you the screen now. It's under email properties, under system properties. Although, does this lead to the same one under mailbox? Or you can go to system mailbox administration email properties. I didn't even know that one was there. It's same screen, but you can disable.
The more you know.
Yeah, the email sending enabled, uncheck that. But then you also need to go to your mailbox.
Delete them.
And the outbox. Empty the outbox before you turn it back on. Otherwise...
but
otherwise
also,
you've only delayed the apocalypse.
yeah.
You probably just made it worse because they'll have now every email will go out at once instead of, maybe over the course of a few minutes or an hour or whatever.
Well, and we live and learn on these things, so
By the way, the outbox like that, make sure that you check the other days also, not just today, because there could be, look, more emails, and those will still send too.
So what you're saying is there's some personal experience there, Brent?
Trying to think if I did that or not. I don't know. It's I don't know. I might have.
I've ever had any from a previous day. I have in dev, but I don't think I remember to delete them out.
I will have to say, whenever I clone over, I forget to do it, and I'll go turn the email on, and I'll start getting 100 emails. It's like, oh crap, yeah,
That's
I didn't.
another wonderful.
Well, we actually have all of. So I've seen a couple of different ways. I've had it turned on and just pointed to me and put it in a separate folder. Randomly emptied it out whenever it gets a bunch. The other thing is I've put it to a service account, created a service account, put it to the service account, so more people can view that service account who have access to it.
I believe you can put comma delimited names in there, so you can have it send to multiple people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just randomly pick somebody in the corporation and let it go to them, and don't tell them. No.
I just created a rule in my Outlook that if it comes from dev, whatever, then
if it comes from dev or test, it goes to a special folder in my inbox.
And auto read.
Yeah,
because I don't like seeing 9,000 unread.
So what you're saying is you take the last person that made you mad and put their email in there.
No, actually, I've never done that. Now that thinking about
it,
idea.
A reminder when you're testing though is to not put. So this actually happened last week. We were testing demand, and I have in test I have all the emails turned off because I do that all in dev, and I only do test when I'm actually between, getting ready to actually push it up. So we normally have it turned off, and we'd had it off for probably 2 months because we were doing the upgrade. And anyway, they wanted to do testing on demand. We put their name in here, turned it on, and this will do if you use this area, it does every single message.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Whether they were in the true field or not.
Everything
awesome. And clean out your outbox before you turn that on, or your outbox, because that's what happens to me is those come across when I forget to clear it out.
Yeah.
So.
And when you have an actual instance, you will have a lot of emails you didn't even realize were being created.
Yes.
from just random.
Well, and the older the instance, the more problematic that is. I mean, we have. I worked with the third customer ServiceNow, and there were, my God, there were emails. They had the most random. There were like 1,100 or 1,200 emails in the system that got sent out for different things. So it gets really complicated really fast.
I mean, think about it. When you have, like, let's say you're using the incident module, right? Every time someone creates an incident, there's going to be an email to the person who created it, an email to the team who received it, an email possibly to either the team or the individual if it was auto-assigned. Anytime they, like, let's say if you have SLAs enabled as well, then you're going to have a bunch, depending on how long the ticket's been sitting in test untouched. You're going to get those starting to be generated fairly often.
Mm-hmm.
I like how we've gone from integrations to talking about email now.
Yeah. I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
We never get off topic on this podcast. So
No, we don't.
No.
Anyway,
Okay.
so for more about REST integrations, reach out and go from there.
And yeah,
And we are here to help you. So if you have a question or you need something, our information is available there to send us a message, holler at us on LinkedIn, really get connected with us, and we'll try our absolute best to help you with whatever you need.
I think that,
if you have an integration issue, I think we could help you with that as well.
I'd love to, I think we'd all like to have live issues, not production, like not in your production environment, but, actual problems to troubleshoot and go over on this podcast, dude.
Yeah, absolutely.
oh yeah, answering questions, helping people out. That'd be great. We
And if you don't want to
done
use
it a
your
couple
instance,
times.
we can replicate. No, depending, unless it's like a core ServiceNow issue, I guess. But we can replicate whatever your issue probably is. So it's one of our devs, and that way, if you're not wanting to use production data, if that's a worry.
Yep, we can try to replicate and try to help
if,
things.
If security is a priority in your organization.
Yeah, it's 2020 or whatever.
All right. With that being said,
I think we've reached the end of.
I think we've reached the end. If you guys, again, if you need anything, have any questions, our information's there. Feel free to reach out to me directly or Randy. It is, I guess we'll have fun next time. So give us a holler if you need anything.
Yep, it's always a pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
See you guys.
We want to thank our flagship sponsor for this show, the Sharpstone Group, LLC. Sharpstone is your source for all of your ServiceNow needs. Implementation, development, administration, strategy, and architecture. Contact the Sharpstone Group today at info@sharpstonegroup.com or 405-594-0100. We'd love to answer your questions or have you on the show. Contact us at ServiceSharp@sharpstonegroup.com or find our LinkedIn info in the notes. Additional sponsorship opportunities are available.